If you are supporting terrorist organizations, if you are promoting genocidal ideologies, I'm sorry, the revocation of your right to be a guest in our nation is just at the stroke of a pen.
To what extent is radical Islam a danger or a threat to the United States today?
Absolutely, especially after the incredible, feckless encouragement of the last 4 years under the putative Biden administration. I mean, just think of the sheer insanity. If you'd read in a fictional work just 10 years ago that a president of the United States is going to dismantle, literally take apart our border regime and allow upwards of 20 million illegals to cross into our country, if you do what we call the red teaming exercise, if you try and think like a terrorist group, like Al-Qaeda, like ISIS, like Hamas, like Hezbollah, of course, if you hate America, you are going to penetrate that nation by inserting your operatives into those floods of millions of illegals across the southern border. So when I took over the senior directorship for counterterrorism in the National Security Council, even my outgoing counterparts told me, the professionals told me, we have a heightened jihadi threat and we are on the cusp of releasing the new U.S. counterterrorism strategy, and it's unclassified, and we are going to make a very clear declaratory statement that with the dismantling of the border under Biden, which we have reversed, with Biden's surrender, the absolutely tragic, outrageous surrender of Afghanistan, the rise of jihadism has increased, not let alone, if you add to that, the billions of dollars the last administration gave to the biggest sponsor of state terrorism in the world, which is, of course, Iran. So, yes, what I call global jihadism has been on the rise in the last 4 years, but thanks to President Trump being back in office, Secretary Rubio, Pete Hegseth, in just the last 4 months, we've unleashed the might of the most powerful nation in the world, and we've killed over 100 high-value targets, over 100 leading jihadists, so that we can actually clean up the mess we inherited from the Biden-Harris administration.
You talk about Iran as being a state sponsor of terrorism. There is some controversy at the moment as to the United States negotiating a potential deal with Iran over its nuclear capacity. And President Trump was asked recently in the White House whether he told Benjamin Netanyahu not to kind of intervene in these talks. And the president said, yes, he did make that statement. What do you make of this situation between the US and Iran and a potential deal in the future?
I'm not sure why anyone would label any of what you just said as a controversy. We are in the midst of negotiations with the regime in Tehran. Israel remains our closest partner in the Middle East, but the president has been explicit. I mean, this is the beauty of having him back as the commander-in-chief. He said 2 things are non-negotiable for him as the president of the United States. 1, the dismantling of the nuclear weapons program of Iran. The president has said the following: they will not be permitted to acquire nuclear weapons. And secondly, which goes to our previous discussion and to my portfolio, the cessation of all support to terrorist groups and to terror proxies, of which Iran has many. So those 2 aspects are non-negotiable, and those are our objectives in these negotiations.
I suppose it's controversial because, first of all, Israel are not keen. Well, they've always been explicit that there shouldn't be a deal with Iran, because any deal with Iran they think would basically be a mistake and handing them too much money, for example. You mentioned the billions of dollars that the Biden administration and before that Obama were kind of allowing Iran to have access to because of this deal. And I suppose the second point and why it might be controversial is, as you say, Iran is a terrorist sponsoring state. So doing a deal with them in which, again, they could receive a lot of money could be controversial.
I don't see how. I mean, unless you don't live in the real world. If you've got a nation that's a problem, you can ignore it, you can go to war with it, or you can negotiate. President Trump is the master of the art of the deal. He has achieved that which no other president has achieved in just a scant few months in office. So he's not about new wars. In fact, he was expressly elected by 77 million Americans to stop the forever wars. So number one, no, we're not going to have World War III just because somebody wants it to happen. Number two, we're not going to do what Biden did, which is ignore the problems and whistle past the graveyard. So number three is, of course, negotiate. You don't have to like the person you're talking to, but in the interests of stabilizing the region, in the interests of making sure a broader conflict is not triggered, which could involve nuclear weapons, of course, President Trump, who is the master of the art of the deal, will negotiate as long as we can achieve the objectives that are of primary import to our national security.
So bringing the conversation back to domestic extremism, I know that the administration has been revoking visas from students who, for example, are supporting Hamas. Do you think that radical Islamic preachers who are preaching hatred, who are preaching against American values, American civilization, should they be allowed to stay in the United States or should they be deported?
Well, look, we have, we're the only nation in the world to have it, we have enshrined in our constitutional order an amendment, the First Amendment, which is the freedom of speech. Now, of course, there are limits to that. You can't incite violence against a specific individual or group, but we cherish our freedom of speech. Nevertheless, if you are a foreigner, you are a guest of this nation. You are required by U.S. law, as Secretary Rubio, as the president has pointed out again and again and again, in statute, to abide by the requirements that impinge upon your being a guest in our country. As such, if you are supporting terrorist organizations, if you are promoting genocidal ideologies, I'm sorry, the revocation of your right to be a guest in our nation is just at the stroke of a pen because, again, you are not a U.S. citizen, you're a guest of this nation, and if you are supporting genocidal activities, if you are sympathizing with terrorist organizations responsible for the deaths of hundreds and thousands of innocents, then you cease to enjoy the guest's rights that are incumbent upon somebody who is here under a certain visa status. So it's the same as if a person was invited into your home and then started to inveigh against you or destroy your property. That guest has no right to stay in your home.
There's current ongoing battle between the administration and Harvard University. A lot of federal funds have been pulled from Harvard, restricting foreign students from being able to go to Harvard and so on. Do you think more broadly the administration is concerned about extremism in American universities? I know that one of the concerns the administration has raised about Harvard specifically is anti-Semitism and the promotion of extremist ideologies.
Well, it's not that we've raised it. We are responding to the empirical evidence. When you had the disastrous, shameful, shocking, scandalous former president, President Gay of Harvard, testify before Congress that she didn't deem from the river to the sea, which means the annihilation of Israel, to be a genocidal statement. It's not our opinion. It's a statement of, dispositive fact. When you have the head of that university saying, well, in the case of Israel, it's contextual and may not be a genocidal statement, then you have all the proof you need. And the only question the president has raised, quite rightly so, is why is an entity that's sitting on tens of billions of dollars worth of endowments, why should it be enjoying federal funding, likewise, to the tune of billions of dollars, if it is espousing and if it is protecting those who are propagating genocidal, anti-Semitic, racist, un-American ideologies on their very own campuses? So it's a very simple question. Why should the American taxpayer be subsidizing those who are supporting the enemies of America?
Well, Harvard has argued that this is about freedom of speech, freedom of expression, academic freedom, and also the administration trying to get involved in Harvard's hiring policies and kind of HR policies, which they, again, say, look, this is academic freedom. We should be able to be independent on this?
Well, two responses to that. You mentioned him previously, ask Charlie Kirk or Ben Shapiro about how their freedom of speech is vouchsafed on the campus quad at Harvard, and why either they're disallowed when they're invited, or they have to roll up with, 50-man security crew simply because they're what? Not promoters of Hamas or Hezbollah. So, the freedom of speech argument is specious because they don't believe in freedom of speech if you're a conservative or if you're pro-America or if you like wearing a red MAGA hat. And secondly, okay, freedom of speech, but why do you get to say that you have the right to billions of dollars of taxpayer funds if you're going to spout absolutely un-American, outrageous, genocidal tripe on your campus? So, no, both of those arguments are completely garbage.
And what about the economic cost, or the potential economic cost, that freezing student visas across the board could have on American university towns that rely on large numbers of foreign students who pay a lot of tuition, but also who support the kind of local economy in some of these American towns and cities?
Well, that's a strange argument. So simply because you're supporting the local Starbucks, you should allow genocidal ideology to be propagated on the campus of the local college. So no, that's not a logical deal. And then secondly, I don't know whether it was J.D. Vance himself or the president or somebody else who yesterday said, well, you know what? How about we move that money, that billions of dollars of taxpayer funds? If you want to support education, let's send it to where we actually need it, not hives of woke garbage where they're chanting from the river to the sea and they're giving you, master's degrees in gender studies. But how about pumping it, if we wish to, into vocational schools? I would much rather, personally, as a US taxpayer, see the economies of rural America supported with regards to vocational schools that desperately need funding to bring us people who are qualified in stuff we actually need.
Can you tell us a bit more about the administration's plans to tackle to enact counter-extremism, I should say, in the United States, particularly, as you said, under Biden administration, millions of undocumented migrants came into the US. What are you going to do about some of those people who are extremists or are supporting terrorist organizations?
Well, thank the dear Lord that we have incredible patriots like Tom Homan, who I just bumped into outside the West Wing today, as our borders are. Thanks to Tom Homan, thanks to Secretary Noem, thanks to Stephen Miller, the Homeland Security Advisor, and others, we have identified over 250,000 of the worst illegals, repatriated them, gotten them out of the country. Some of them have been sent to Guantanamo Bay. President Trump I'm very keen on this, has announced his desire to reopen the Alcatraz prison where we could put some of the worst. So those people, the tier 1 threats are being identified and being removed from the country. With regards to the broader ideological challenge, as we've been putting pen to paper in the new U.S. counterterrorism strategy, the center of gravity for these threat groups, for the Salafist jihadi threat groups, is their ideology. So our goal is, and you have to wait till the strategy is published to see how we do it, our goal is to target that ideological center of gravity, that jihadist ideology, with counter-propaganda, with counter-messaging, especially in league with our closest Muslim and Arab allies. So in counterterrorism, you can't get better in the Muslim world than countries such as Jordan and the Emiratis. So we'll be working closely with those who have the requisite messaging tools and authorities and credentials to say, you know what, this modern jihadism is going to be taken down, is going to be hollowed out by those of our allies who are Muslims and who are Arabs and who are actually at the top of the target list. If you understand groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS, yes, they want to kill Jews, yes, they want to kill Christians, but the people they want to target the most what they deem to be apostate Muslims, Muslims who do not agree with them. So we will be tackling that ideological center of gravity head on with our partners, and domestically we'll be identifying and removing those who pose the greatest threat to our security in the homeland.
And one of those apostate Muslims is Ayaan Hirsi Ali. She has been fighting her whole life against Islamic extremism, against the brutality of things like FGM, where young girls are mauled when they're children. It's disgusting. And she argues that there is a kind of civilizational clash, this is her words, between Islam and the West. Do you agree with that?
I would say there is and she's not the first person to say this, there is a civilizational clash between the West and between barbarity. I wouldn't say Islam, because what does that mean? You're condemning Jordan, one of our closest counterterrorism partners, to be part of that inimical force. You're what, condemning Morocco, likewise, one of our closest, the UAE? Absolutely not. No, that's a fallacious. If she said that, I disagree with it. I'm not sure if she quite said that, but I would say it is, as October the 7th demonstrated to us, as 7/7, as September the 11th have demonstrated to us, it is a conflict between the forces of civilization and the forces of barbarism. President Trump's most important speech that he ever gave, in my opinion, was from the first Trump administration very early on, the summer of 2017, when he stood in Warsaw at the site of the Warsaw Uprising. At the end of one of his shortest speeches, it's less than 40 minutes long. I encourage all of your viewers and listeners to go and watch the film. At the end, he asked the question of the ages, and he said, the only question of our time is whether or not we in the West have the will to fight and defeat those who wish to destroy our civilization. That statement of truth was correct 7 years ago, and it's true today.